at exactly 7:12. On a Wednesday morning, I stood in front of a coffee shop register holding a paper cup that cost $3.15. The cashier smiled politely as she tapped the screen. "I'm sorry, sir. It says your card was declined." I frowned. "That's strange. Try it again." She did. Another beep. Declined. A young man waiting behind me shifted impatiently. A woman farther back sighed loud enough for everyone to hear. I reached into my wallet and pulled out a second card. This one should work. It didn't. The cashier looked embarrassed for me. "I'm really sorry." I could feel the heat climbing into my face. It had nothing to do with the cost of the coffee. It was that sensation every American past a certain age dreads, that quiet, humiliating instant when the strangers around you start asking themselves whether you've lost the plot, whether age has finally caught up and left you behind. I bit down on my pride. "It's all right," I told her, keeping my voice low. "I'll sort it out another time." I left the cup sitting on the counter and stepped out into the crisp morning air. Traffic moved along the street like the whole world was carrying on just fine. I got out my phone and dialed my son. 2 rings then, his voice. "Morning, Dad." Both my cards got declined. A short silence opened up between us. Then came the sigh. Yeah, we canceled them." I was sure I'd heard him wrong. "You what?" "We canceled your credit cards." My hand clenched around the phone. What would possess you to do that? His tone was even almost too even, like he'd practiced it. "Dad, you're 70. You've been forgetting things lately. We decided it was time to take some of the complexity out of your finances." "I haven't forgotten a thing." He hadn't finished his answer when a second voice bled in from somewhere behind him. My daughter-in-law. She wasn't making any effort to be quiet. She meant for me to catch every word. "I told you he'd be upset." Then the phone changed hands. "Hi, Vernon." What followed was a short, flat laugh, the kind that sits in your gut wrong. "If you need money, just run it by us first." I went speechless for a moment. She pressed on. "It'll be easier for everyone. Everyone. Not me. Everyone else." Through the windshield, I watched strangers file into the coffee shop, arms full of laptops and gym bags and briefcases, their Wednesday unfolding, right on schedule. Mine had just taken a turn I didn't see coming. I could have pushed back. I could have raised my voice. Instead, I kept it to 4 words. "I understand, thank you," and ended the call. Welcome back to Dad's Revenge, a place for stories about the quiet strength it takes to stand up for yourself, even when the people testing you are the ones you love most. If this kind of story speaks to you, consider following along so you never miss one. Before we go further, I'd love to know from what you've heard so far, who are you rooting for in this story, and why? Drop it in the comments when you're ready. One last thing, some details in this story have been shaped for the purpose of storytelling, and any resemblance to specific real people or events is purely coincidental. It's the truth underneath that matters. I didn't go home. I headed straight to my bank. I've lived in the same Indiana town for 36 years. When Rosemary and I bought our little brick ranch house in 1987, interest rates were steep, but we believed in honoring our debts and putting down roots. We raised 1 son under that roof. Birthdays, graduations, Christmas mornings, anniversaries, all of it happened inside those walls. Rosemary passed away from pancreatic cancer 4 years ago. Some mornings, I'd still reach across to her side of the bed before the memory caught up with me. Grief shifts its shape as the years go by. It doesn't leave you. It just gets quieter about it. After I retired from civil engineering, I built myself a daily routine that gave the hours some structure. Wednesday mornings were my favorite. Coffee, the local paper, a quick stop at the bank, if I needed cash. Sometimes lunch with an old coworker, unhurried, familiar mine. My son Garrett lived just 20 minutes away with his wife Nadine and our 2 grandchildren. Those kids meant everything to me. Garrett phoned every Sunday. Nadine usually took charge of holiday dinners. From the outside, we had every appearance of a tight-knit family. Maybe we believed it ourselves. About 8 months earlier, Garrett had proposed helping me bring my finances into the modern age. "Dad," he'd said one afternoon while setting up my new phone, "everything runs online now." I admitted that technology and I had never been close friends. He offered to bridge the gap. He linked my bank account to online banking, arranged automatic bill payments, loaded banking apps onto my phone, swapped out passwords, and adjusted security settings. "It'll keep the scammers away," he told me. Nadine backed him up. There are so many seniors getting taken advantage of these days. It sounded perfectly sensible. I trusted him. He was my son. The bank manager, Patricia Dunmore, had known me for nearly 15 years. The moment I came through the front doors, her face lit up. "Good morning, Vernon." "I hope so." Something in my tone must have given me away. "Everything all right?" "I don't think it is." 5 minutes later, we were seated in her office. She pulled up my account without delay. Her expression shifted. She stopped typing, looked back at the screen, then across at me. "Mr. Aldcroft, what's wrong?" She paused. "I'm seeing several recent changes." "What kind of changes?" She slowly turned the monitor so I could see. "The mailing address on your account was updated yesterday." I leaned in closer. It wasn't my address. It was Garrett's. Something clenched in my chest. Patricia went on. "The primary phone number was also changed. Garrett's number again. The email address, Nadine's email." I sat there staring at the screen and said nothing. "When did all this happen?" "Yesterday afternoon." "I wasn't here yesterday, I know." She navigated to another page. "I'm also seeing that replacement cards were mailed out to the updated address." I blinked. What replacement cards? The ones issued after the previous cards were canceled. It felt as though the floor had been soundlessly pulled away beneath me. "I never asked for any replacement cards." Patricia set her hands flat on the desk. "Did you authorize these changes?" "No." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached for her phone. "Could you have Dwight from Fraud Services come down?" Her voice stayed steady. Mine was less certain. "Fraud. We just want to get a clear picture of what's happened." 10 minutes later, Dwight arrived with a tablet under his arm. He introduced himself, then began working through the account. His questions were direct. "Have you lost your identification and did you authorize anyone to manage your banking?" "My son helped me get set up with online banking." "Does he have your passwords?" "I suppose he does." Dwight and Patricia exchanged a glance. Nothing dramatic measured, practiced the kind of look shared between people who have seen this pattern before. He scrolled further. "There are authorization forms attached to your account. I haven't signed anything recently. They appear to grant another individual administrative access." My heartbeat didn't quicken. It slowed. That only happens when the shock is too large to absorb all at once. Dwight enlarged one of the digital documents. "There are electronic signatures on file." He turned the tablet toward me. I recognized my name, Vernon Aldcroft, written precisely the way I'd always written it, except I hadn't written it. Not here, not ever. I looked up. "Can a signature be copied?" Dwight chose his words with care. "That's one possibility." Patricia leaned forward. "Mr. Aldcroft, before we draw any conclusions, we'd like to go through every change made to your account over the past several months." "Several months," she nodded. "These situations rarely unfold all at once." Dwight added something quietly that landed like a stone in still water. "They build up one small step at a time." For the first time that morning, the declined coffee stopped occupying my mind. It had never really been about 3:15. That small transaction was just the first crack showing in a wall someone else had been constructing for months. And I had no idea yet how much of my life was already standing on the other side of it. I didn't sleep much that night. Not out of anger. Anger runs hot. It makes you want to throw things. Raise your voice, demand answers at full volume. What I was feeling ran colder than that. It was disbelief. I sat in my living room with the television on, but the sound off, staring at a photograph of Rosemary taken the summer before she got sick. We were out on the porch after repainting the house. She had a streak of paint on the tip of her nose because I'd flicked a brush at her. She'd laughed so hard, the neighbor stepped outside to see what the commotion was. Rosemary used to say, "When something doesn't make sense, don't rush to fix it. First understand it." She'd been right about most things. That night I decided I wouldn't call Garrett, not yet. 38 years as an engineer had drilled one lesson into me. You never start repairing a bridge until you understand why it failed. The next morning, I was back at the bank. Patricia met me with a sympathetic look. "We've been going through everything." Dwight from Fraud Services joined us again this time, carrying a thicker file than the day before. He spread several printed pages out across the conference table. "It's easier if we work through this in order." I nodded. He pointed to the earliest entry. 8 months ago, the online banking credentials were reset. That didn't surprise me. Garrett had helped me set things up around that time. The following month, Dwight continued. A secondary contact was added to the account. Garrett. Then Nadine 3 weeks after that. Transaction alerts were redirected. Redirected to where? To your son's phone. I looked up sharply. So I stopped receiving fraud alerts. According to these records, yes. I eased back in my chair. Every single change on its own could have passed for routine housekeeping. Laid end to end, they told a different story entirely. Dwight slid another page in my direction. 3 months ago, spending limits were modified. I never requested any spending limits. He nodded. They were reduced. To what he paused. $500. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because the absurdity of it was staggering. I'd spent 40 years overseeing million-dollar construction projects. Someone had quietly decided I now needed permission to spend more than $500 of my own money. Patricia spoke carefully. Mr. Aldcroft, we've also found no evidence that funds have been taken. Then what is all this? She picked her words with deliberate patience. It appears to be a pattern of increasing control. That phrase stayed with me on the drive home. Not theft, control. As the miles passed, memories began arranging themselves into a shape I hadn't been able to see before. Last Thanksgiving, Nadine had grabbed the restaurant bill before my hand ever reached my wallet. "You've done enough for this family," she'd said, smiling warmly. I'd taken it as generosity at the time, but I also remembered what she'd said just a little later, almost in passing. "Are you still carrying all those credit cards that must get confusing?" I hadn't given it a second thought. Then there was Christmas. Garrett had offered to organize my tax records. "Dad, it'll save you the hassle." I'd welcome the help, but afterward he'd ask questions that were oddly specific. "How much do you keep in checking? Any CDs coming? Due? Have you ever updated your beneficiaries?" At the time, I assumed he was being responsible, thinking ahead. Now I found myself wondering if he'd been taking inventory. By Thursday afternoon, I was parked outside the law office of Clifton Waverly. Clifton had drafted Rosemary's and my wills nearly 15 years back. He wasn't one for show. He drove an aging Chevy Tahoe and still kept paper files stacked in neat rows around his office. More to the point, he had earned my trust over many years. He looked genuinely taken aback when I came through the door. "Vernon." He stood and extended his hand. "It's been too long. I wish this were a social visit." His expression sobered. We spent close to an hour going over everything, the declined cards, the account, changes, the signatures. Clifton didn't interrupt once. When I'd finished, he folded his hands on the desk. "I want to see every document." The bank had already sent over copies by email. He put on his reading glasses and started working through them. 5 minutes passed, then 10. At last, he set his glasses down. "Something isn't right here? You saw it too?" He nodded. "These authorization forms trouble me. The signatures are part of it." He tapped one paragraph with his finger. "This document references conversations that supposedly took place in my office. Those conversations never happened, I know," I said. He looked straight at me. "Because I wasn't part of them." Quiet settled over the room. Clifton had never been one for theatrics. If anything, he had a habit of understating things. So, when he leaned back and said, almost under his breath, "I think you need to move very carefully here." I paid attention. "What do I do in the meantime?" He closed the folder. "Nothing." I frowned. "Nothing. Don't go to your son with this." "Why not?" "Because when someone believes they've already succeeded, they stop being careful about concealing what they're doing." He let that land. People grow careless once they think the battle is over. Before I stood to leave, Clifton asked something that seemed to come from left field. "Has anyone brought up assisted living recently?" I went still. "Why would you ask that? Just answer the question." I rubbed my jaw. "A few times." "Who brought it up, Nadine? How often?" I thought back through it. At Easter, after church one Sunday, at my granddaughter's birthday party. Always offhand, always wrapped in concern. "Dad, wouldn't it be nice to stop worrying about yard work? Imagine having your meals taken care of. You'd be around people your own age." I'd always smiled and moved the conversation along. Clifton gave a slow nod. "I've encountered this pattern before." My stomach dropped. "What pattern?" "Sometimes financial control comes first before larger decisions." "Like, what kind of decisions? Having someone declared incapable of managing their own affairs." I held his gaze. He raised a hand. "I'm not saying that's what's happening here, but it's a possibility. It's a possibility." That evening, I took a different way home. Without quite meaning to, I found myself passing one of the newer retirement communities on the edge of town. Neat landscaping, walking paths, white rocking chairs lined up along broad porches. There was nothing wrong with the place. It looked genuinely pleasant for someone who had chosen to be there. Chose. That was the word. And just like that, another memory surfaced. About 6 weeks earlier, Nadine had pressed a glossy brochure into my hands. "I just thought you might want to look it over." I hadn't opened it. She'd kept right on smiling, no pressure. I found myself wondering whether there had been pressure all along, just the kind you couldn't see. Friday morning, Clifton called. I've been digging around. What did you find? Property records. My breath caught. What about them? Your house isn't the issue. Then what as I found some emails? Emails, not yours. He hesitated. I believe your son reached out to a real estate agent sometime in the past few weeks. My hand went tight around the phone. What did he ask? Clifton exhaled carefully. He inquired about what homes in your neighborhood were going for. My gut turned over. He can't sell my house. No. Clifton's voice stayed level, but someone thinking ahead might still want to know what it's worth. After we said goodbye, I sat alone at the kitchen table, the same one where Rosemary and I had balanced checkbooks, helped Garrett with his homework, mapped out vacations we could barely swing. Every nick and scratch in the wood held a story. I pressed my palm flat against the surface. This had stopped being about money. It wasn't even about the house, not really. It was about something harder to absorb. Someone I had given my whole life to protecting had quietly concluded I no longer had the right to make my own decisions. Late that afternoon, Clifton called one more time. His voice carried a different weight. I need you here first thing Monday. Did you find something else? Yes. What is it? He was quiet for a beat. I believe they may already be drawing up paperwork that calls your capacity to manage your own affairs into question. I closed my eyes. Through the kitchen window, the flag Rosemary had insisted we put up every summer moved softly in the breeze. For the first time since that Wednesday morning, I understood this was no longer a family dispute. It was a race, and one careless step could cost me far more than a credit card. Clifton had the yellow notepad out when I arrived Monday morning, along with 2 folders and a cup of black coffee that had long gone cold. He closed the office door before either of us said a word. I spent the whole weekend thinking about your situation. So did I. I expected as much. He pushed one of the folders across the desk toward me. I don't want to alarm you without cause, Vernon, but I can't let you make decisions driven by emotion either. I nodded. What do you think I should do? He sat back. For now, let them go on believing exactly what they already believe. I frowned, meaning that you're unaware. I looked at him. That feels like playing a role. It's strategy. He folded his hands on the desk. If Garrett and Nadine realize you figured this out, they'll go on the defensive overnight. They'll shut down. They'll start deleting records and they'll have an explanation ready for every decision they've made. And if they think I'm still in the dark, they'll keep acting naturally. He paused. People give away far more through ordinary behavior than they ever reveal under pressure. On the way home, I turned his advice over and over in my head. I had never been much of a performer. Rosemary used to say she could always tell when I was planning a surprise because I was entirely incapable of hiding things. Now, I had to conceal the most important discovery of my life. Not for the sake of revenge, for the sake of the truth. That afternoon, Garrett called. Hey, Dad. His voice was bright, almost breezy. You doing okay? I'm getting by. I've been meaning to come see you. You're welcome anytime. How about dinner tomorrow? Sounds good. He paused. And don't give the credit cards another thought. Everything's being handled. I kept my voice even. I appreciate you looking out for me. A brief silence, then a soft laugh. I knew you'd understand, Dad. After we hung up, I sat there a good while. The hardest part wasn't keeping up the pretense. It was hearing my own son read my silence as acceptance. The following evening, Garrett and Nadine showed up with takeout from my favorite barbecue place. Nadine pulled me into a hug at the door. How are you doing? Fine. You look a little tired. I didn't sleep well. She and Garrett traded a look. So, did you remember to take your blood pressure medication? I've been on that medication for 12 years. She smiled. I know. Just wanted to check. The talk meandered through the grandchildren's soccer matches and grocery prices, climbing week by week. Nothing out of the ordinary right up until dessert. Garrett cleared his throat. Dad. Yeah. I've been thinking about some things. I'm sure you have. He smiled. Keeping track of finances gets more stressful the older we get. I just listened. We don't want you lying awake at night about bills or people trying to scam you. Nadine reached over and rested her hand on mine. You've spent your entire life looking after everyone around you. She made it sound genuine, almost tender. Let us look after you for a while. I looked from one to the other, then gave a slow nod. Maybe you're right. The relief that moved across both their faces was immediate. I don't think either of them caught what it meant. That relief said more to me than any confrontation could have. Over the next 2 weeks, I became the version of myself they seemed to be expecting. I called Garrett before larger purchases, not because I needed his approval, but because I wanted to watch how he handled it. One afternoon, I mentioned needing to replace my lawnmower. He asked how much. Around $600. Silence. Then, why don't you hold off? We should talk about that first. Talk about it first. As though I were a teenager asking for the car keys. Another time I mentioned a weekend fishing trip with an old coworker. Nadine's response was immediate. Do you think that's really safe? I've been fishing for 50 years. I know, she said, still smiling. But accidents happen. Every exchange was reasonable on its surface. Taken together, they all pointed the same way. A smaller life. Fewer choices. Less ground to stand on. Clifton told me to keep a record of everything, so I picked up a composition notebook. Nothing elaborate, just dates, times, and the exact words people used. Every time Garrett or Nadine made a decision for me, without asking, I wrote it down. Every time one of them mentioned our plan for my future, that went in too. I started printing emails, text messages, and voicemails as well. None of it was dramatic. That was the unsettling part. Control rarely makes an entrance. It slips in dressed up as helpfulness. The bank's fraud department kept working through the account. Dwight phoned every few days. We've identified more changes. Are any of them illegal? We're still working that out. What does that mean? Intent matters, he said. Helping an older parent with their finances wasn't a crime on its own. Neither was setting up online banking access. The question was whether those actions had crossed into something unauthorized. There are gray areas, he told me, but certain records have us concerned. What concerns you most? The cumulative pattern. That phrase again. Not any single event. The pattern. One Saturday morning, I dropped into my favorite hardware store. I'd known the owner, Theo Ingram, for nearly 20 years. He glanced up from the shelf he was stocking. Vernon. Morning. You've been a stranger lately. Been busy. We drifted through the gardening section, talking tomatoes and mulch. Then he asked the way you ask something you already think you know the answer to. So, when are you moving? I stopped. What I thought Garrett mentioned you were looking to downsize. He told you that. Theo gave a small shrug. Couple weeks back. What exactly did he say? He mentioned you'd probably be selling before winter. I kept my face easy. Nothing's been settled yet. Oh? Theo looked genuinely thrown. The way he said it, I figured things were already moving along. I drove home with my stomach wound tight. Garrett wasn't just drawing up plans. He was sharing them with other people, as though the outcome were already certain without a word to me. What I was about to learn would reframe everything I thought I understood about the people closest to me. Before that moment arrives, I want to ask you something. If you discovered that someone you fully trusted had been quietly working around you, would you confront them immediately, or would you wait and let the truth finish revealing itself first? A few days later, something I hadn't expected happened. My next-door neighbor, Judge Norbert Castle, caught me as I was wheeling in my trash cans. Norbert had stepped down from the county probate court several years back. He and his wife had lived beside us since before Garrett was born. You got a minute? Sure. We settled on the front porch. He didn't circle around it. I had lunch with Theo Ingram. I smiled faintly. Word gets around. It does in a small town. He held my gaze. Everything all right? I almost gave the standard answer. Fine. All good. Instead, I said no. Norbert sat quietly as I walked him through the whole thing. He didn't cut in once. When I'd finished, he crossed his arms. I handled too many cases like this. You think Garrett is trying to steal from me? He shook his head slowly. Could be. Could be something else. Then what I think good intentions have a way of drifting into entitlement over time. He let that hang in the air. I watched families persuade themselves they were being helpful while stripping someone of their voice one choice at a time. He reached into his shirt pocket and offered me a business card. Audrey Sinclair. Who's that? The finest elder law attorney I ever saw argue a case in my courtroom. I've already got Clifton. You do? Norbert smiled. Clifton's excellent. He tapped the edge of the card. But Audrey focuses on one thing, specifically. What's that? Keeping competent older adults from being treated as though they aren't. That evening, Clifton phoned. There was an energy in his voice I hadn't heard before. I think we've caught a break. What happened? A document Garrett forwarded to a financial advisor got copied to the wrong email address by mistake. My pulse jumped. What did it say? I can't go into everything over the phone. Just give me the key part. Clifton went quiet for a moment. Then he read the subject line. Dad doesn't know yet. Those 4 words stayed with me long after the call ended. Dad doesn't know yet. Maybe they thought I was getting confused. Maybe they thought I was easy to manage. Maybe they even believed in their own way that they were protecting me. But one thing was no longer deniable. They were shaping plans for my future, as though I'd already forfeited my seat at the table. By the time June rolled around, my life had divided itself into 2 separate tracks. In one, I was simply Vernon Aldcroft, a retired engineer who cut his grass every Thursday, went to church on Sundays, and spoiled his grandchildren at every opportunity. In the other, I was quietly putting together a record against my own son. Some mornings, I still couldn't make those 2 things feel like they belonged to the same life. I despised every minute of it. But Clifton kept reminding me, you're not building a case against Garrett. You're building a record of the truth. There was a real difference there. One was about punishment, the other was about clarity. That distinction was the only thing that kept bitterness from taking hold. Clifton set up a meeting with Audrey Sinclair. Norbert had been right about her. Within 10 minutes of sitting across from her, I understood the reputation. She wasn't flashy, she was exact. She listened far more than she talked. When I finished laying out the situation, she asked a single question. Mr. Aldcroft, has any physician ever diagnosed you with dementia, cognitive impairment, or diminished capacity? No. When was your last physical? About 3 months ago. Anything of concern? Noted. My doctor told me to walk more and eat less pie. It was the first time all morning. Audrey smiled. That's encouraging. She made a few notes. Based on everything I've seen today, you are fully capable of making your own financial and legal decisions. I know that. I know you do. She looked directly at me. The challenge isn't convincing yourself. It's establishing it on paper if someone decides to challenge it. Those words settled over the room like a low ceiling because that possibility no longer felt remote. It felt entirely real. Over the following 2 weeks, Audrey worked in close coordination with Clifton and the bank. Together, they assembled a detailed timeline. Every password reset, every change of address, every adjustment to account notifications, every card replacement request, every authorization form bearing my name. Nothing was stretched, nothing was inferred. If a document couldn't back it up, it stayed out. We deal in facts, Audrey told us. Facts don't need volume. One afternoon, she pushed a thick green binder across the conference table. Take a look. Inside were copies of everything. My notebook entries, printed emails, bank records, phone logs, statements from Patricia and Dwight, and screenshots showing exactly when account alerts had stopped reaching my phone. I turned through the pages slowly. The story told itself. Not through a single catastrophic act, but through dozens of small ones, one quiet decision at a time, like pulling bricks out of a foundation until the structure gives way. Meanwhile, Garrett and Nadine kept up their role as devoted, caring family. At church, they insisted on carrying my Bible. Nadine would say loud enough to carry, "We just worry about him." People would smile warmly. "You're so lucky to have children who are so attentive." I'd smile right back. They've certainly stayed involved. Not a word of it was untrue. After the service one Sunday, a couple from our Bible study stopped me. "We heard Garrett's been helping you sort out your finances." "That's so thoughtful of him." I nodded pleasantly. It has been educational. I found myself wondering how many people had accepted the version of events being offered to them. Maybe Garrett had accepted it himself. That thought cut deeper than the rest, because if he truly believed he was helping me, then at some point he had stopped thinking of me as his father. I had become a situation to be managed. The grandchildren had no idea any of this was happening. Lily had just turned 11. Owen was 9. When they came over, they still tore through the backyard chasing each other with water balloons, or pleading with me to make grilled cheese sandwiches. Children pick up on more than people give them credit for. One afternoon, Lily glanced up from her coloring book. "Grandpa, yeah, sweetheart. How come Mommy always asks Daddy if you remembered things?" I looked at her carefully. "What do you mean?" "She asks if you remembered your medicine?" Lily set a small crease in her brow. "Or your appointments." She tilted her head. "I don't think you're forgetful." "Neither do I, but I just smiled at her. Sometimes grown-ups worry too much." She nodded and turned back to her coloring. I sat watching her for a long while. Whatever came next, I was not going to let those children get caught in the crossfire. Late one afternoon, Garrett stopped by without warning. He had a folder tucked under his arm. "You have a few minutes." "Of course." We sat down at the kitchen table, the same one where he'd once ground through algebra homework while Rosemary baked chocolate chip cookies. He flipped the folder open. I've been looking into senior communities. I glanced at the brochures inside. Glossy photographs, gardens, fitness rooms, cheerful dining halls. You'd really take to these places. I'm happy where I am, I know. His manner stayed easy and calm. But keeping up this house is a lot. It really isn't. You wouldn't have to mow anymore. I like mowing, no snow to shovel either. I've come through 50 Indiana winters just fine. He smiled, patient and unhurried. Dad, would I just want you somewhere safer? Safer. Another perfectly reasonable word, another brick out of the wall. I leaned back in my chair. And what would become of this house? He answered without a pause. We'd work that out. We, not me, I'll think about it. His posture softened. That's all I'm asking. After he left, I opened my notebook. Under today's date, I wrote 4 words. He assumes my agreement. A week later, Clifton called with news I hadn't seen coming. I think it's time. For what to protect yourself properly. That afternoon, we met with Audrey again. For nearly 3 hours, we went through every piece of my estate. My will, retirement accounts, life insurance, the house, all of it. I don't want to punish Garrett, I said. I know that. I still love him. Clifton nodded. Nothing we're doing here changes that. I don't want my grandchildren hurt because adults made poor choices. They won't be. Together we built a completely new estate plan, one grounded in transparency rather than ease. An independent professional trustee would handle anything involving significant assets if I were ever truly incapacitated. Not Garrett, not Nadine, a licensed fiduciary, with no personal stake in the outcome. My home would be placed in a trust that could not be sold without my approval while I was competent, or without multiple independent medical assessments confirming otherwise. The protections weren't intended to shut my children out. They were intended to make sure no single person could quietly take the wheel. Audrey smiled as I signed. This protects your wishes. It also protects my family. She nodded. Sometimes those two things are exactly the same. Then came the final step one that even surprised me a little. I want everyone in the room together, I told Clifton. You mean Garrett and Nadine? Yes. And who else? You, Audrey, Patricia from the bank, Dwight. Clifton raised an eyebrow. That's quite a gathering. I smiled for the first time in weeks. It won't be that kind of gathering. He got it immediately. No, it won't. I called Garrett and invited him to Sunday dinner. Nothing out of the ordinary, just family. He sounded happy about it. That'll be real nice, Dad. I've also asked a few others to join us. Oh, my attorney. A short pause followed. Is something wrong? No. What are we marking the occasion for? I looked out the kitchen window toward the oak tree Rosemary had planted the year Garrett graduated high school. Its branches moved gently in the summer air. Just an important family conversation. When Sunday came, Garrett and Nadine walked through the front door carrying a homemade peach cobbler. Nadine smiled as she came in. You look wonderful. I feel wonderful. She glanced toward the dining room. The table was already set with extra chairs brought in. Clifton arrived first, then Audrey. A few minutes later, Patricia came through the door, followed by Dwight, carrying a slim leather portfolio. Garrett looked puzzled. Nadine's smile pulled noticeably tighter. What is all this? I gestured toward the dining room. Please, let's all sit down. Everyone found a chair. The room settled into quiet. Garrett looked around the table, then turned back to me with an easy, confident smile, the same one I'd been watching for months now. Dad, he said, have you finally decided to let us handle everything? I held his gaze. After weeks of waiting, I gave him my answer. Yes. The silence that followed was almost a relief. Yes. Garrett's face opened with visible relief. Nadine reached beneath the edge of the tablecloth and pressed his hand. She assumed I didn't catch it. I caught everything now. I'd been training myself to. Garrett settled back in his chair. I think that's the right call, Dad. So do I. His smile broadened. I'm glad we're finally seeing this the same way. So am I. Clifton quietly folded his hands. Patricia and Dwight held their silence. Audrey simply observed. No one hurried. No one jumped in. I let my eyes move around the dining room. These walls had held birthday cakes and Thanksgiving dinners and high school graduation parties and Christmas mornings with wrapping paper ankle-deep across the floor. Now they were about to hold something none of us would ever be able to forget. I cleared my throat. Before we eat, I want to say thank you to both of you. Nadine smiled. You don't need to thank us. I do. Garrett nodded. We're family. I looked at my son. You've taught me something I didn't expect to learn. He seemed pleased by that. What's that? I told him honestly. You showed me how easily good intentions can become something that looks a lot like control. The room went still. Garrett's smile slipped a little. I'm not sure I follow. I think you do. I reached beside my chair and lifted the green binder, the one Clifton and Audrey had helped put together, and set it gently at the center of the table. Nobody's in trouble here. Nadine crossed her arms. What is this? The story of the past 8 months. Garrett looked uncertain. Dad, I'd like everyone to hear this through before anyone speaks. Neither of them said a word. I opened the binder. The first change occurred 8 months ago. I slid the first document across to him. The day my online banking credentials were reset. Garrett glanced down at it. I helped you set that up. I know you did. The second change redirected fraud alerts away from my phone and onto yours. He paused. That was so I could watch out for you. I nodded. I believe that. I turned another page. The third change reduced my spending limits. Nadine spoke up quickly. That was just to cut down on fraud exposure. Patricia finally spoke. Our records show Mr. Aldcroft was never informed that those limits had been put in place. Nadine looked over at her. We were doing what we thought was best, Dwight replied evenly. Looking out for someone generally means keeping them in the loop. No voices were raised. None needed to be. Facts carry their own weight without any help. I kept turning pages, replacement cards, address changes, a new phone number, a different email. Each document had a date. Each date carried meaning. I watched Garrett's expression as I went. He wasn't angry. He looked unsettled, like a man slowly recognizing that the picture in front of him bore little resemblance to the one he'd been carrying in his own mind. Nadine stayed composed. You signed authorization forms. I looked straight at her. No, I didn't. Someone did. Dwight opened his portfolio. We've completed our review of those documents. Nadine folded her arms more tightly. So several signatures appear inconsistent with Mr. Aldcroft's historical records. Garrett turned sharply toward Dwight. What does that mean exactly? It means we're looking into how those authorizations were obtained. Garrett turned to Nadine. What is he talking about? For the first time all afternoon, she didn't answer right away. Clifton spoke next. Garrett, I'd like to ask you something. My son gave a slow nod. Did your father ever tell you he wanted his mailing address changed? Garrett looked uncertain. No. Did he ask you to cancel his credit cards? No. Did he tell you to redirect his security notifications? No. Garrett looked over at Nadine. I thought. He stopped. Clifton waited. You thought what Garrett swallowed hard. I thought Nadine had gone through all of this with Dad. Every eye in the room moved to her. She looked genuinely caught off guard. You assumed I'd taken care of it. Garrett stared at her. You told me you had. I said he agreed to things. You told me you'd spoken with him. I did speak to him. When? She hesitated. I mentioned it to him. Mentioned. That isn't the same as asking. The room went quiet again. Something inside me gave way right then. Not from betrayal exactly, but from the realization that Garrett hadn't been driving all of this. He had simply stopped asking questions. Somehow, that was almost harder to sit with. Audrey spoke gently. Mr. Aldcroft, may I ask Garrett something? Go ahead. She turned to face him. When did you first start believing your father couldn't handle his own affairs? Garrett looked down at the table. I'm not sure. Take a moment. Several seconds passed. He finally answered. After Mom died, my chest tightened. He continued, his voice quieter now. He seemed so lonely. I was. You forgot to return a library book once. I almost smiled. I paid the fine, I know. You mixed up one doctor's appointment. One time. You called me once to ask about online banking because technology keeps changing. Garrett pressed a hand to his forehead. I just kept noticing small things. Audrey nodded. And what did those small things become? He closed his eyes. Evidence. Were they actually evidence? No. He whispered it. Just assumptions. Assumptions. I got up and walked to the kitchen. For a moment I stood at the window. Rosemary had loved watching the birds come to the feeder she'd hung out there years ago. A cardinal landed on the fence post. She used to say cardinals were reminders that the people we loved had never truly gone. I wasn't certain I believed that, but I wish she were sitting beside me right now. She would have known exactly what to say. I came back carrying an old photo album. I opened it to a picture of Garrett at 9 years old, standing proudly beside the birdhouse we'd built together. You remember this? He smiled in spite of himself. The sides weren't quite square, so we stayed out in the garage until midnight, getting it right. You never walked away from it, neither did you. I closed the album. When did you decide I deserved less patience than you gave that 9-year-old boy? His eyes filled immediately. Dad, no. My voice stayed steady. I genuinely want to know. He had no answer. Neither did Nadine. Then Garrett stood his chair, scraping softly across the hardwood. I'm sorry. Nothing added to it. Just those 2 words. I'm so sorry. He looked straight at me. I honestly believed I was looking after you. I know that. I wasn't after your money. I believe you. I thought if I took care of everything, his voice broke apart. Nothing could go wrong. I nodded slowly. And instead, you made something go wrong. Tears moved down his face. Nadine stared at him. Garrett. He turned to her. No. She went still. He shook his head. No more. He looked back at me. I should have talked to you. Yes, I should have trusted your judgment. Yes, I stopped seeing you as my father. My heart ached. I started seeing you as someone who needed to be managed. The honesty of that sentence filled the room to its edges. Nadine finally lowered her eyes. Quietly, barely above a whisper, she said, I thought being efficient was the same as being kind. There was nothing left to argue. Nobody tried. Clifton broke the silence. Vernon, there's one remaining matter. I nodded. I know. I looked at Garrett. I've already signed a new estate plan. His face fell. I understand. You haven't heard it yet. I don't deserve anything from you. This isn't about punishment. I rested my hand on the binder. It's about protecting everyone around this table, you included. He looked confused. What do you mean? I'll explain it, but first I looked around at everyone. I think we should eat dinner. For the first time in months, nobody sitting at that table was performing for anyone else. Dinner was almost disarmingly ordinary. The pot roast cooled while the roasted potatoes made their way around the table. Someone asked if anyone wanted more buttered corn. Patricia said something kind about my homemade cornbread, and Dwight quietly admitted he'd slipped back for seconds before dessert had even been mentioned. For a little while, nobody brought up banks or legal documents or the word control. We just ate. It reminded me of something Rosemary used to say when Garrett and I would get into some pointless argument. Nobody solves family problems on an empty stomach. She was right more often than either of us cared to admit. When the plates were cleared away, I poured fresh coffee all around. This time, I let myself smile. Nobody's card was going to be declined for that cup. Clifton opened the new estate binder. Vernon has asked me to walk everyone through the changes. Garrett nodded quietly. I'm listening. The previous estate documents have been revoked. Neither Garrett nor Nadine reacted. They just listened. Mr. Aldcroft remains in full control of every financial decision. Clifton glanced over at me as it always should have been. He continued. If Mr. Aldcroft ever becomes genuinely unable to manage his own affairs, that determination cannot rest with a family member. Garrett looked up. Who decides 2 independent physicians? Audrey added, and even in that event, financial authority would pass only to an independent licensed fiduciary, not directly to any beneficiary. Garrett gave a slow nod. So, no one in the family controls it. That's correct. Nadine spoke for the first time in nearly 20 minutes. You don't trust us, I answered before anyone else had the chance. No. That single word dropped into the silence like a stone, and then I went on. I don't trust any one person with unchecked power. I let that settle over the room. Not you, not Garrett, not even myself. I glanced over at Clifton. That's why we put safeguards in place rather than relying on assumptions. Clifton gave a slight smile. Exactly. Then I explained the part that mattered most to me personally. My house has been placed in a living trust, Garrett asked quietly. Can it still be sold someday? Of course, when I decide. I smiled gently. Or when I'm no longer here. A brief silence followed. This home isn't valuable because of what the real estate market says. I looked slowly around the dining room. It's valuable because your mother loved it. I gestured toward the hallway. Those pencil marks on the wall tracked your height every single birthday. Then I nodded toward the backyard. That oak tree was planted the very week you were born. Finally, my eyes settled on the family photographs lined across the shelves. A stranger sees property. I see my whole life. Garrett lowered his head. I forgot that. I know. There was still one more surprise. I drew a thin folder from beside my chair. This has nothing to do with inheritance. Garrett looked puzzled. What is it then? I've set up a small charitable fund. Nadine looked up. For what purpose? Financial education. Audrey smiled. Vernon had spent weeks shaping the idea. I nodded. It'll sponsor free workshops at our community library. Garrett frowned. Workshops for older adults about investing about technology. Everyone looked uncertain. I explained, when you helped me set up online banking, I saw how many people my age feel ashamed to ask basic questions. I paused. They shouldn't. The room held its quiet. I don't want another 70-year-old handing over complete control simply because they're afraid of looking foolish. Patricia smiled warmly. Our bank would be glad to take part. Dwight nodded. So would our fraud prevention team. Clifton added, I'll volunteer to walk people through powers of attorney and estate planning. I couldn't hold back a smile. Rosemary would have loved this. Taking something that caused pain and making it into something that helped people. That had always been her way. The weeks that followed weren't simple. Trust doesn't return just because someone says they're sorry. It comes back because they start behaving differently. Garrett called less often, not because he was pulling away, but because he'd finally learned to ask rather than assume. One Saturday morning, he showed up at my door carrying a toolbox. I noticed your porch railing is loose. It is. I could take a look at it. You could? He stood there shifting his weight. Would you like me to? I smiled. I'd appreciate that. One sentence, one question, one choice. It felt entirely different from before. Nadine took longer to come around. She wrote me a letter, not an email, an actual handwritten letter. She admitted she'd always believed that efficiency was the answer to every problem. Growing up, she'd watched her own parents struggle after her grandfather developed Alzheimer's disease. Her mother had said more than once, if we'd stepped in sooner, everything would have gone more smoothly. Nadine had carried that lesson into our family, without ever stopping to ask whether every situation called for the same response. She had mistaken preparation for permission, protection for control. She apologized without asking me to pretend none of it had happened. That mattered. Forgiveness begins when the excuses run out. Summer gave way slowly to autumn. The oak tree Rosemary had planted the year Garrett graduated high school glowed orange and red. Lily started middle school. Owen proudly made the baseball team. Life stubbornly and beautifully kept moving forward. One Sunday after church, Garrett asked if I'd like to go out for breakfast, just the two of us. We went back to the same little diner we used to visit when he was a teenager. After the waitress refilled our coffee, he looked across the booth. I miss talking to you. I've been right here, I know. He gazed down into his cup. I spent months making decisions for you. I noticed. He smiled sadly. I forgot something. What's that? You've been making good decisions your whole life. I reached across the table and squeezed his shoulder. We all let important things slip sometimes. He laughed softly. I guess I proved that. Almost exactly 1 year later, on another Wednesday morning, I woke before sunrise. Out of habit, I drove to the same coffee shop. The same cashier was behind the counter. She studied me for a moment. Then her face lit up. I remember you. I was hoping you wouldn't. She laughed. The coffee is still $3.15. I figured inflation hadn't completely won. She rang it up. I reached into my wallet, pulled out my credit card, slid it into the reader, approved. No hesitation, no decline, no embarrassment, just one quiet beep. The receipt came out. She handed me the cup. Have a wonderful day. You too. As I turned toward the door, a voice came from behind me. Dad, Garrett. He'd followed me there after our weekly breakfast had quietly become its own tradition. He reached into his pocket. Let me get this one. I looked at him then, at the card already back in my wallet. I smiled. No. He hesitated. I've got it. I laid a hand gently on his shoulder. I know you mean well. I do. I've got this. He smiled. Not the confident smile of someone taking charge, but the grateful smile of a son who had finally learned the difference between helping and controlling. I know you do, Dad. We walked out together into the morning light, not as a man being managed, not as a son trying to manage. Just a father and a son, learning perhaps a little later than either of us would have liked that love without respect eventually becomes control, but love with respect becomes family again. On the drive home, I thought about that small cup of coffee. It had cost only $3.15, yet it had laid bare months of quiet assumptions, buried fears, and good intentions that had gone badly off course. That small cup of coffee cost next to nothing. But what it gave back to me was something I hadn't realized I'd lost: the quiet dignity of handling my own life. This story cost me months of doubt, a few sleepless nights, and more grief than I expected. I had already buried the woman who was my compass. And then I had to reckon with the fact that the people she and I had raised together had somewhere along the way stopped seeing me as a man and started seeing me as a problem to be solved. I believe God didn't let that email land in my inbox by accident. The timing of it, the way it cracked things open before they went any further, felt less like coincidence and more like grace. What came out of that season was painful, but it also taught me things I wouldn't trade. If someone is making decisions about your life without telling you that is not love, that is management, demand the difference. Love your children enough to let them help you, but never love them so much that you forget to love yourself too. If trust has been broken, don't rush the repair. Watch what people do, not just what they say they're sorry for. And if you ever feel like your voice is being quietly taken from you, speak clearly before someone else finishes the sentence for you. If this story about a father's quiet fight for his own dignity, a real dad's revenge, reached something in you, I hope you'll share it with someone who might need to hear it. Leave a comment and tell me what stayed with you. And if you haven't already subscribed to Dad's Revenge, there are more stories like this one waiting for you. Thank you for spending this time with me. Take care of yourself out there.